London's winter air carried a sharp bite that morning. The fog curled between the buildings like whispered secrets, wrapping Parliament Square in a veil of pale grey. Edward stood at the edge of the square, his coat collar turned up, watching the flag flutter above Westminster Palace. He never imagined he'd be invited here not as a lobbyist, not as a politician, but as a voice of ethics. And yet, here he was. A week earlier, Clara had burst into his office, excitement in her eyes. "You've received an invitation from the Department of Commerce," she said, placing the embossed envelope on his desk. Edward raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall owing them any favors. They are launching a committee on responsible innovation. They want you to speak about business integrity and sustainable entrepreneurship." He smiled faintly. So now they want advice from the man they once called reckless. Clara grinned. "Maybe London's finally catching up with you." Inside the grand, wood-paneled chamber, the atmosphere was heavy with formality. Members of Parliament sat in rows, their pens poised, expressions neutral but curious. Cameras flashed, whispers buzzed. Edward stepped to the microphone. He had faced investors, rivals, and the press, but this was different. This was history. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and deliberate. "The greatest crisis in modern business isn't financial, it's moral." The room fell silent. "We've built systems that reward short-term profit and punish long-term vision. Companies rise fast, fall faster, and leave behind communities that trusted them. We've mistaken speed for success and noise for impact." He paused, letting his words settle like dust in sunlight. "True growth, the kind that lasts, demands courage. The courage to slow down, to question, and to say no when the world tells you yes. Integrity is not a luxury. It's the foundation upon which everything else stands." There was a murmur not of dissent, but of reflection. Even the most hardened MPs looked up from their notes. After the session, Edward was approached by Lord Whitmore, a senior official with a reputation for charm and cunning. "Mr. Blake," he said with a thin smile. "That was quite the performance." "It wasn't a performance," Edward replied evenly. "Then you truly believe what you said? That we should prioritize ethics over profit?" "I don't just believe it. I've lived it. The moment we trade conscience for currency, we lose more than money, we lose direction." Whitmore chuckled softly. "You remind me of myself, 30 years ago. Full of ideals. Then I discovered how the world really works." "And did it make you happier?" Edward asked. The older man hesitated, then simply turned away. By evening, the speech had gone viral. Clips flooded social media. Businessman calls for moral revolution. Edward Blake challenges Parliament. Integrity over profit. True North's website crashed under traffic. University students quoted him. Even rivals begrudgingly respected him. Clara called late that night. "You've started something, Edward. People are talking not about money, but about meaning." He smiled faintly, staring out the window at the London skyline. Then maybe it was worth all the noise. Days later, Edward received another call, this time from a powerful conglomerate, Sterling and Company, Nathan's Empire. "Edward," came Nathan's smooth voice. "Congratulations on your little speech. You've got influence now, real influence. What do you want, Nathan? A partnership. You bring the moral front, I bring the global reach. Together, we reshape business and make a fortune while doing it. Edward sighed. You still don't understand, do you? Oh, I understand perfectly. You want to change the world. I just want to own the company that sells you the tools to do it. Then we're still on different sides of the river, Edward said quietly. Maybe, Nathan replied. But remember, Edward, rivers can flood. The line went dead. That night, Edward walked along the Thames, the water glimmering beneath the lights. He could hear the city breathing alive, hungry, restless. He thought of his father, a man who'd spent his whole life working honestly, quietly, without fame or fortune. He thought of Clara, his team, the people who had believed in him. And he thought of Nathan, his mirror, his warning. You can't change a system by destroying it, he whispered. You change it by showing there's a better way. He stood there for a long time, as Big Ben struck midnight. A new chapter had begun, not for his company, but for himself. Edward Blake had faced every temptation success could offer and turned away, not because he was unshakable, but because he had learned what truly mattered. The world didn't need another businessman. It needed a compass. And in a city built on ambition, Edward Blake had finally found something rarer than gold: integrity. The rain fell in thin, relentless lines against the glass of Edward's penthouse window. Below, London glowed a web of light, movement, and noise. But Edward's world, at that moment, felt eerily still. Clara entered quietly, holding a folder marked with the seal of the Global Trade Council. Her expression was unreadable. They've made their decision, she said softly. Edward turned from the window. And? True North has been blacklisted. Temporarily but effectively. They are freezing all new contracts tied to our green tech division. He blinked. On what grounds? They are calling it unfair disruption of established markets. But everyone knows it's political. The problem began weeks earlier. True North's newest innovation, a low-cost renewable battery, had gained global attention. It was cheap, efficient, and most importantly, independent of the oil-based monopolies that had dominated the market for decades. The invention had been a breakthrough. Too much of one. Corporations across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East began to feel threatened. Investors withdrew, lobbyists whispered, and soon, the council's investigation followed. Clara sighed. It's Nathan. He's behind this, I'm sure of it. Sterling and Company owns the distribution chain they claim we disrupted. Edward's jaw tightened. So he's using the system to punish integrity. He's using the system because it listens to him, she said grimly. Within days, Edward was summoned to Geneva, to appear before the council. The chamber was vast, sterile, and humming with translators' murmurs. Flags from 50 nations hung from the ceiling like quiet witnesses. Across the room sat Nathan Sterling, perfectly composed, dressed in his signature charcoal suit. He gave Edward a courteous nod, the kind that said checkmate before the game begins. The chairwoman's voice echoed through the hall. Mr. Blake, you stand accused of destabilizing trade through unregulated innovation. Do you have a statement? Edward rose slowly, his notes untouched. Innovation, he began, is not the crime here. Fear is. A ripple of reaction ran through the room. We built True North not to replace old powers, but to prove that business can serve people and profit. If that's disruptive, then perhaps disruption is overdue. Nathan's faint smirk twitched a sign of irritation. Progress, Edward continued, does not wait for permission from those it threatens. And if this council seeks to punish that, then it does not protect trade, it protects control. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Later that evening, as Edward left the building, a quiet voice called out, "Mr. Blake." It was Elena Voss, a council advisor, young, sharp, and quietly idealistic. She handed him a folder. "Off the record," she said. "Read this." Inside were internal documents, proof that Nathan's conglomerate had funded lobbying efforts against True North. It was damning, explosive, and illegal. Edward looked up. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I joined the council to make change, not protect corruption. But if you use this, it won't be pretty." "It never is," he said. That night, Nathan appeared in Edward's hotel suite uninvited, as always. The air between them buzzed with the tension of unfinished wars. "You could end this easily," Nathan said, pouring himself a drink. "Join Sterling and Company again. We'll absorb True North. You'll keep your position, your team, and your peace." Edward stared at him. "At what cost?" Nathan smiled faintly. "Only your principles. You've sold bigger things before." Edward's eyes darkened. "Not anymore." "Then you'll lose everything," Nathan said coldly. "And I'll still win." "You might win the game," Edward replied, stepping closer. "But I'll win the story." 3 days later, headlines exploded. Edward leaked the documents. The scandal shook the financial world. Sterling Empire faces corruption allegations. Council under fire for corporate bias. Whistleblower businessman exposes global network. True North's stock plummeted, then, slowly, began to recover. But Edward was banned temporarily from international trade negotiations. He had burned the bridge deliberately, completely. Back in London, Clara found him sitting on the roof of their office, watching the skyline through the drizzle. "We lost major investors," she said quietly. "We'll be months behind schedule." Edward nodded. "I know. And yet," she added, "you don't look defeated." He smiled faintly. "Because this time, the truth hurt the right people." They sat in silence for a while, the city lights reflecting in the puddles around them. "What now?" she asked. "We rebuild," he said simply. "But this time, we build something untouchable." Edward Blake had sacrificed more than profit. He had risked everything to protect the idea that integrity could still matter in a world addicted to power. He had lost his allies, his comfort, his certainty. But somewhere beneath the ruins of reputation, a new legacy began to rise, not of wealth, but of truth. For in the war between ambition and conscience, he had chosen the side that history remembers, not the side that wins. The storm had passed, at least, for now. London was waking again, cleaner, sharper, alive with rumors of change. And Edward Blake, once the city's most untouchable name in finance, was quietly rebuilding his kingdom from the ashes. But this time, the offices of True North looked different. Gone were the marble floors and glass walls. Instead, there was a converted warehouse in Shoreditch Rough, open, filled with the hum of purpose rather than prestige. Clara stood beside him as they watched the new team assemble young developers, researchers, and idealists. "They don't care about the scandal," she said with a faint smile. "They care about the mission." Edward nodded. "Then we might just have a chance." True North 2.0 wasn't just a company anymore, it was a movement. Edward called it ethical growth, a network of entrepreneurs dedicated to building profitable businesses that didn't exploit or deceive. The media laughed at first. Investors hesitated. But people listened. Articles appeared in The Guardian, The Times, and international outlets. The man who had been called the fallen mogul was now being described as the conscience of capitalism. Still, Edward knew better than to believe headlines. He had been both their hero and their villain before. It was at one of these reform conferences in Oxford that he first saw Isabella Reyes. A sustainability expert from Spain, sharp, eloquent, and disarmingly composed. She challenged his ideas publicly, without hesitation. "With respect, Mr. Blake," she said during the panel. "You speak of ethical reform, but your past empire thrived on the very structures you now condemn." The audience murmured. Edward smiled, unoffended. "Then perhaps I'm proof that redemption isn't a myth," he replied. "Would you rather those who built the system never tried to fix it?" She didn't smile back. "I'd rather they didn't rebuild it in their image." Something in her tone, direct, fearless, caught his attention. By the end of the day, he invited her for coffee. She declined. But the next week, she sent an email. "Perhaps I was too quick to judge. Let's talk professionally." Weeks turned into months. Isabella joined True North as a consultant, and together, she and Edward began developing the company's most ambitious project, yet a global platform, connecting small ethical businesses with transparent investors. They worked late nights, arguing, laughing, testing ideas until dawn. Clara noticed the change immediately. "You're smiling more these days," she teased one evening. "That's dangerous." "You think she's dangerous?" Edward asked. "I think you think less clearly when she's around," Clara replied. He laughed, but the truth lingered. As True North's influence spread, so did its enemies. Old rivals whispered that Edward was simply rebranding his ambition under the veil of morality. Anonymous accounts began leaking rumors, half-truths mixed with venom. Then came a leak. Private financial documents, showing that one of True North's new partners was linked to offshore accounts. Edward was furious. He summoned the core team: Clara, Isabella, and 2 advisors. "Someone inside is feeding this," he said, voice steady but cold. "And we will find them." Isabella frowned. "Are you suggesting one of us?" "I'm suggesting someone wants to destroy what we're building," he interrupted. "And I won't let that happen again." Clara looked at him, uneasy. This wasn't the calm, reflective Edward she'd seen since the scandal. This was the man who once ruled the market through fear and precision. And he was back. 3 nights later, Clara called him into her office. She had proof. A transfer encrypted, hidden deep in the system leading to a Swiss account. The sender: Isabella Reyes. Edward stared at the screen in silence. The world around him seemed to dim, the hum of the computers fading into a distant buzz. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. "Completely. I checked 3 times." He nodded once, his face unreadable. "Leave it with me." He found Isabella at the rooftop terrace overlooking the Thames. The city lights flickered below, dancing across the water like distant stars. "You could have told me," he said, his tone almost calm. She turned slowly. "Told you what?" "That you've been funneling our data to Sterling and Company." Her eyes widened, hurt, disbelief, then something else, resignation. "Edward, it's not what you think." "It never is," he said bitterly. "They all say that before the truth arrives." "Listen to me," she said, stepping closer. "Nathan approached me months ago, before I joined True North. He threatened my research, my team. I gave him surface-level access to stop him. But I never sabotaged us." He wanted to believe her. Every instinct screamed not to. "Trust," he murmured, "is the rarest currency of all." "Then spend it wisely," she whispered, turning to leave. Days later, new evidence confirmed Isabella's story. The leak had come from someone else, one of Edward's advisors, bribed by Sterling and Company. But by then, Isabella was gone. She'd resigned quietly, leaving behind only a letter. "I joined True North to help build something honest. But honesty without faith is impossible. Perhaps one day, you'll understand that integrity isn't about control, it's about trust." Edward sat alone in his office, the city buzzing outside. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't negotiate or rebuild: loss. Edward Blake had rebuilt his empire, stronger and cleaner than before. But in his pursuit of purity, he forgot the one thing even the most powerful mind cannot control: the human heart. For every empire, no matter how noble, must eventually face the cost of its own defenses.